Good afternoon. I have the great pleasure of introducing Erick Shambarger from the city of Milwaukee. He started out with the city as their city economist, and he's been moved over probably about a good decade plus now into a lot of the sustainability efforts that have been going on at the city. Um, he's been part of a driving force for Wisconsin Local Government Coalition. He helped launch a Wisconsin First Property Assessment Clean Energy Program called PACE that's been helping finance a lot of projects around the city. He's been doing things with the city to drive solar and other renewable projects. They had a project that they installed, the largest in the city, a 2.25 megawatt solar energy project. He's been a driving person for the climate equity plan with the city. That's one of the areas where I have been interacting with Erick. Also in the past, he had, or currently still has it, the Better Building Challenge. And he brought MATC in to use our students to help with doing energy audits. And that was back in about 2013, 2014. And it was a great opportunity for our students to get some experience. So it was a good program from that perspective. And he's been involved in many other projects. Milwaukee Energy Efficiency Program, Water Centric City Initiative, a homegrown program. He led Development City's Green Infrastructure Plan. And the one that really I've been helping out with is the City County Task Force on Climate Change and Economic Equity. And this is an area where his passion really came through to me on what he sees as really important for driving sustainability here in Milwaukee and our region. So today he's going to be presenting and talking about greening the grid, local action, and utility advocacy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erick. Welcome, Erick.
All right. Thanks, Ted. Thanks, Peter, for having me. It's a privilege to be here today to share with you what we are doing to not only green up our buildings, but also, green the grid. So get our presentation started here. As we heard from the other Peter in the session prior to this, talking about building performance standards, which I'll get to what we're doing in Milwaukee at the end of this presentation about that. There's a lot of interest in building efficiency, but we also need to make sure that the energy that's powering our buildings itself is green. And that's where we got to think about the grid as well. So I'll talk about both of those things today. We are putting a climate and equity plan together for the city, as Ted mentioned. When you think about, my job is to think about all these sources of energy and cutting energy use across the board, cutting carbon emissions across the board. So that includes the electric grid, it includes buildings, it includes our transportation sector and industry. So today we'll touch on the electric grid because it really underpins a lot of the other actions that we can take in buildings as well. So I'm going to talk about my experience in Wisconsin. Wisconsin's utility environment is not the same as in every state in the country. In some respects, we have kind of an older regulatory model about our electric utilities. But I like to frame our thinking about greening the grid and energy policy in general with Wisconsin's existing energy policy law, which is codified in state statutes here. But it says the first thing you got to look at is energy conservation and efficiency. Next is non-combustible renewable energy, then combustible renewable energy. So, biomass and things like that, then nuclear, and then fossil fuels, starting with natural gas. And at the bottom of the list is coal. This is what state policy has said, but there's this caveat in there that says to the extent cost effective and technically feasible, here's your word. Well, it's a practical matter. I think, utilities have said, well, that means coal. Coal is the most cost effective thing. It's been changing to some extent as there's a shift to natural gas, but for a long, long time, renewables were much farther down on the list of what was actually getting built when it came to utility infrastructure. I think all of that is starting to change dramatically with the cost of solar coming down to the point now where it's cheaper to build a new solar plant than it is to build a new coal plant. So utilities, from economic reasons, have been shifting more to natural gas, and we want them from a climate standpoint to kind of move even faster in the area in the direction of renewable energy. Wisconsin is a regulated utility state, so there's lots of different utility models across the country. But in Wisconsin, this is under a law that's been probably a century old. The state got divvied up into private investor-owned utilities. Wisconsin is in We Energy's service territory, but Madison is in Madison Gas's territory, Madison Gas and Electric, and then Xcel Energy is in the western part of the state. So utilities have kind of been granted this natural monopoly status, which means for the most part, cities and building owners have to work with the electric provider that they're given. There's some flexibility to put solar on your own roof. But for the most part, utilities have played a very strong role. So customers haven't had a lot of choice in Wisconsin when it comes to, what you can build. I think the utilities are more open to solar than they've ever been, but they are also very conscious to try to maintain their monopoly status. And so there's been a lot of regulatory battles about how to interconnect what's called distributed energy, rooftop solar and the like, into the system. So this is, again, Wisconsin has got a more traditional model here. Most states have some version of this, but places like California have a lot more tools at their disposal. And so as an example, our use of renewables in Wisconsin is relatively low compared to other states. There's what's called net metering rates, which is if you build solar on your own roof and you have excess produced by those panels, the net metering is the rate the utilities will buy back that energy. And you can make the case that they should be buying it back at a high rate because when the sun is shining is when they need power the most at peak times. But in Wisconsin, they give you a wholesale rate of like 3 cents a kilowatt hour. So for most people, it's not cost effective to build more solar on your roof than what you need to power that particular building. Some other states have what's called community choice aggregation. So California, as an example, municipalities can elect to buy their power from other players. They can do their own solar deals at a much larger scale on the grid. We don't have that option here. We also don't have community solar in Milwaukee. So there's a lot of things we don't have that are because of our state policy and our utility policy. And then this last one, third-party financing, is one that I've been very involved in, which is trying to open the market for solar. So solar companies that can come to you and offer to basically build solar on your roof, and instead of customer having to pay all the money up front, they can have the solar installer pay for it and then buy the electricity over time from the solar installer or pay a service fee over time. In the case of Wisconsin, our electric utility has blocked those kinds of systems or refused to interconnect them, and that's been the subject of several years of legal wrangling around that. And then the last thing states can do is states can just establish through their legislatures a renewable energy portfolio standard, meaning the state can say utilities have to buy so much renewable power over time, and usually it increases. Wisconsin does have a renewable portfolio standard, but it hasn't increased since the early 2000s, and it's only 10% for the whole state. So clearly that's not enough to, really move the ball forward on clean energy the way we need to tackle the climate crisis. So here's an example of the fuel mix across the country and how Wisconsin stacks up. So Wisconsin uses a higher percentage of coal than the rest of the country, unfortunately, a little bit less natural gas, and we're further behind the pack on wind and solar. So this is not a great story for the state as a whole. And I work in the city of Milwaukee. We don't have direct control over our utilities situation, but we do have a role in advocating for a better one. So the good news, despite our current situation, is the utilities have been making more climate commitments. So We Energies, the parent company of We Energies, for example, says it plans to eliminate coal as a fuel by 2035. Much of that is getting replaced by natural gas, but they are building much more renewables at a faster pace than they ever have before. So those kinds of public commitments are encouraging, but they're not sufficient. And what I mean by that is it's one thing to say you're going to do it, but it's another thing to hold them accountable to make sure they're on that path. And then this last year, they kind of backslid and said, well, maybe we're not going to convert some of our plants as fast as we thought we were because of the concerns about prices of natural gas and things. So goals are important. We have to have goals, but we also need to hold utilities accountable for meeting these goals. Our stance is that we need both distributed renewable energy, meaning rooftop solar, as well as large scale utilities solar. So it's a great use of land and rooftop space to put solar on our own buildings. We want to do that, but that's not going to be enough. We don't have enough rooftop space to provide enough power for the buildings the way they're designed now, let alone start electrifying vehicles and electrifying and converting gas heat to electric heat. So we do need big utility scale systems as well as the distributed. And we want to try to create a policy environment where you have a really robust competitive rooftop solar market while respecting the role utilities play at the large scale. So here's the opportunities that we've seen for local action, and we've done these through our Milwaukee Shines solar program, as well as similar things with our energy efficiency programs as well. But the first thing local governments can do is to streamline local permitting for solar. So let's first make sure as a city we are not our own worst enemy when it comes to permitting solar, and making sure that our zoning rules allow for solar, that our inspectors know what to look for in solar. You know, they still need to do their job and make sure that they're providing that third-party review of a solar installation, make sure the contractors are installing it right. But what we have found is, unfortunately, a lot of our own installers, they need training to know what to look for. So there's a lot we can do to streamline local permitting around solar and remove those barriers. We've created financing programs in partnership with local credit unions so people can get funding to pay for the upfront cost of solar. And then they can get tax credits normally on their tax returns, but that upfront financing is really important. And we've also done group buys where we get bulk pricing for homeowners to do solar. And then this third one is where we've really been trying to actively engage with our utility. And so we've had the mayor basically wrote a letter to We Energies along with other local governments here in Wisconsin and said, look, we've got climate goals. We need you to create better programs to allow us as a large customer to purchase renewable power. And we were able to get one program in place already. We built the largest solar energy project in the city's history on a city-owned landfill. The utility built it for us and give us a lease payment to build it on our land. So that's good. And now we're in discussions about how do we come to terms that all of the rest of our power for municipal operations and all of our streetlights and our water utilities, how can we make sure all of that is coming from renewable sources as well? And so there's a proposal in front of the Public Service Commission that would allow us to buy renewable power from the utility built by new renewable energy systems. And then the last piece that we're really concerned about as a local government is workforce development and equitable workforce development. You know, one of the reasons I've worked with Ted for many years is we want to make sure that we're creating jobs in this new renewable energy transition for people who live in our city, for people of color who may have been excluded from the last energy iteration. And now there's this opportunity to train new people to put them to work building solar and energy efficiency projects as well. And that's where it's really important to work with our MATC, Milwaukee Area Technical College, and other training providers here. So this map, this graphic here kind of shows the regulatory landscape of if you want to green the grid, here's all the players. It's not simple, it's quite complicated. You have the local government, which in Wisconsin has no direct control over our utilities, but what we can do is we can advocate, and we've created what we call the Wisconsin Local Government Climate Coalition to be the voice of local governments to advocate for in utility decisions. And we can leverage our purchasing power as a city to try to tell the utilities, look, we want to buy more renewables. Let's do that. But you got the public utilities themselves, which are in many cases investor owned. So they answer to their shareholders. Then you have the Public Service Commission. In some states, it's called Public Utility Commissions. They are the regulatory body that oversees the utilities. You have the state policy through the legislature. They have a role, and then you have customers and advocates. And so we have to kind of navigate on this chessboard to try to to be an effective advocate to get the utilities to provide better policies to green the grid and to move faster. In Wisconsin, we have a Republican legislature, a Democratic governor, and the governor's appointees are on the Public Service Commission. So that's where we've tended to focus our action, is in this public utility space. And if you haven't ever worked there, the public utility commissions are these quasi-judicial bodies, and they have dockets, and you have to really follow the rules to make your voice heard, so to speak. They're, like I said, they're quasi-legal proceedings, and so you really got to be active in their dockets and intervene on rate cases in order to make a difference. And that's what we're able to do, both directly as a city and through the Wisconsin Local Government Climate Coalition. So here's an example of the Wisconsin Local Government Climate Coalition in action. You can see the document there. There was a Public Service Commission had opened an investigation of how to make our grid zero carbon. And you see the cities there had teamed up and put in our recommendations in this particular docket. And then in other cases, the city has been a direct what's called an intervener in rate cases, meaning that we're almost like a legal party to a hearing, and we can request documents of the utility and write briefs and things like that. So we've been, I think, more active than most communities in the state, it's fair to say, in leading advocacy work at the Public Service Commission. The three principles of utility engagement that we have articulated through the Wisconsin Local Government Climate Coalition is, again, this utility scale transition to renewable energy with clear benchmarks along the way, so that we're not just setting goals that are 4 decades away, but we're saying, hey, where should we be in 5 years? Where should we be in 10 years? Can we retire all of our, hold to that goal of retiring all of our coal plants by the year 2035, all fossil fuels by 2045, and be carbon neutral by 2050. And then we want kind of universal access to renewable energy. So the opportunity for municipalities to opt into large scale solar projects, so that we're not just at the mercy of what the utility thinks the fuel mix should be, but that we can use our purchasing power to essentially buy into renewable projects. We're advocating for policies to support a robust and competitive rooftop solar market. So making it easier, basically saying utilities should not block people that want to put solar on their own roof. And then equity considerations and the opportunity for community solar. And what community solar is for people that can't put solar on their own roof, they could buy into a local solar farm and pay for it on their utility bills, pay as they save on their utility bills. And then the last point here is what we're calling the utility of the future. So the old historic model was that the utilities, they own the distribution network, they own the transportation, and then they own centralized generation. And we want to see something more nimble where the utility has that, they still maintain the distribution grid, but more like, think about the internet with different content creators, you could have more distributed energy coming into the system rather than the big centralized power plants, or as a complement to the big centralized power plants. So I think there's a lot of room there for utilities to start to incorporate climate goals and different ways to regulate around this utility of the future. So we have to green the grid. That it really underpins all these other strategies, whether it's electric vehicles or whether it's building beneficial electrification in buildings. Again, we heard in the prior discussion about a lot of interest in electrifying our buildings. Well, it doesn't really help if our buildings are using natural gas to heat now, and then we're going to transition to electric buildings, but that the grid is powered by coal and natural gas. Well, that may not really advance our climate goals. So all of the electrification strategies are premised on the idea that our grid is going to get greener. And that's why we have to really focus on that as well. This is a nice graphic from the EPA Energy Star program that shows how electrification in buildings is going to go, from electric cars and charging in your garage to air source heat pumps, and more electrification, not less. So again, it's really important to increase the amount of renewables we have on the grid. So I threw a lot at you with utility policy. I hope it wasn't too much, but I think the important things are to understand the rules of the game in your state. These do vary state by state. Energy markets are not free markets, they're regulated markets. they're regulated in almost every state to varying degrees. And these public utility commissions shape the rules of the game. And sometimes the rules of the game and the proceedings when they're establishing these rules can seem very arcane. But once you get into it, you can see the impact it can have on how it can shape markets. And that's why we've inserted ourselves at the Public Service Commission. We do want to partner with utilities if possible. And we've made that very clear. We don't want to be in endless fights with the utility. We want to support smart regulation, though, that's in the public interest. So I've been, challenging them in Public Service Commission meetings, but I've also been working with them to build solar where there's opportunities to partner. So we want to keep that door open to partner with the utilities where possible, but have a realistic view about how that happens. We want to build coalitions to amplify your voice. Those coalitions can be with other local governments. They can be with the building sector, the commercial real estate sector, other interest groups. But the more people speaking out on these issues, the more effective we can effectuate change. And then the last lesson is you got to get in the game. If you're not in the game, you're not going to make the difference that we need to see. So encourage you to do that, and happy to discuss in the question and answer session how you might be able to do that. Last thing Ted asked me to touch on was building programs and policies that we're implementing here. This might be the most relevant to this audience. As Ted mentioned, we ran what we call the Better Buildings Challenge program. So we have energy reduction goals for city buildings. We track our energy use in EPA's portfolio manager tool. We have PACE financing, and we have all these things to make a voluntary energy efficiency program for commercial buildings. But I think where we're going is that we might need to have a more regulatory approach to really decarbonize our buildings. In Wisconsin, the state building code is established at the state level, so local governments do not control the building code. We have had these voluntary programs that I mentioned, and now we're looking at exploring these ordinances that would require more decarbonization in our commercial buildings, whether that be electric vehicle charging infrastructure in a certain amount of commercial, for a certain amount of parking spaces in large commercial structures and surface parking lots. We've made a commitment that we will do a benchmarking ordinance, so that requires reporting of energy use on an annual basis for large commercial buildings. And the idea being, just like when you buy a refrigerator and there's an Energy Star guide, right, a guide about how much energy that building uses, that we would potentially make that public, so that potential tenants know if they're going to rent a building, is that an energy efficient building or not. And then on the last step would be a building performance standard that regulates or sets benchmarks over 10, 20 years about what we're requiring buildings to do to improve on energy. So that's what's in store. We're going to try to take the success we've had with voluntary programs, try to move it to this next level in the next year or two. So with that, I know that's a lot of content, and I would be happy to answer questions or discuss how this might be applicable to other places.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, if you have any questions, put them into the chat, and I'll bring up to Eric. But I just wanted to point out this, in looking at what Eric's done, he's taken the approach of being both cooperative and trying to guide people or push people in the right direction. And he's done this in so many different directions in the city of Milwaukee and the surrounding area. And what I see is he's building this web, this network that is making use of all these partnerships that he has to help improve the overall sustainability of southeastern Wisconsin. And to me, it's been a really great driving force and a good example of how other cities, other regions can try to approach looking at sustainability and try to drive us towards decarbonization. So it's really, really important. The other aspect, I was hoping, Eric, you could talk a little bit about the effort that you and entities like Marquette University, UWM, MMSD, MATC did to work together to sign a commitment to go and try to work with We Energies to get renewable energy.
Yeah, that's right. So I alluded to it a little bit, but so back in 2008, we were having lunch, which is where great things happen. the various sustainability directors of these government institutions. And we were all talking about what we're doing with our own operations, but we said, what are we going to do together to try to make a bigger push? And we talked a lot, and we thought, well, we got to really pull together on this energy front and try to push We Energies in a better direction here. And so we got our respective leaders, the mayor, the head of the chancellor of UWM, and others to write a letter to We Energies again saying, we've got greenhouse gas reduction goals. We want to be carbon neutral. We've signed these commitments. We need your help. We want to help with you. We don't want an adversarial relationship per se. What can you do? So at the time, this is again 2018, We Energies put together two programs. One was what was called Solar Now, which was where they would directly build solar on your land and lease it from you. And then they created this other more complicated program where you could buy into large scale renewable projects. So we've done one that became the Solar Now project on our landfill by our airport. So the next time you fly into Milwaukee, you'll be able to see 10 acres of solar built by our utility on a otherwise unusable landfill. And then the other one was it's a proposal to where you could buy into large scale renewables. So on that one, the utility proposed it. We have kind of made a counter proposal to them to try to simplify the terms of that agreement and to create local labor provisions in that. And that kind of revised one is now in front of the Public Service Commission for review. We call it the Renewable Pathways Tariff. And if it's adopted, it would allow the city or any big, large institution to basically buy up to 100% of their power from renewable sources. So we're really excited about that opportunity to potentially work with the utility. But to Ted's point, it's about collaboration, it's about partnership, it's about being assertive and asking what you want, but also making sure that, we're holding other parties accountable to what they said they were going to do as well. So that's what we try to do through both advocacy at the Public Service Commission and direct outreach and collaboration with the utilities where possible.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other items on the chat for questions. So I think what we'll do is we are about 5 minutes over, I believe, on time. Let me double check that. I think we're supposed to end at 1:15. And so we have a good 10-minute break now. And Erick, I just want to thank you for coming here and speaking today. It's been informative, and I look forward to working with you in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, everybody, for having me.
I don't know why